back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm sharing with you all of the books that I read in October. I actually read a ton in October. I finished a lot of books, and a lot of them were Victorian books. So if you saw my Victober vlog that just came out, you will have heard me already talk about quite a few of those books. So I'm gonna try to be brief on my thoughts on the Victorian Classics that I read because I have already discussed them more in depth, but I'll make sure that vlog is linked so that way you can go check it out if you're interested in hearing more in-depth thoughts. I'm also going to have this video divided up into sections according to genre. So that way, if there are genres you're not as interested in, or for example, you already watched my Victober vlog, so you wanna skip over the Victorian Classics, you can do that. All right, I'm actually gonna start with the Victorian Classics because they're first on my list. So I'll have Victorian Classics first and then other classics that weren't Victorian as well. So starting off with The Trumpet Major by Thomas Hardy. I have an interesting relationship with Thomas Hardy. He's kind of all over the place where there have been books of his that I've hated, some that I felt meh about, some that I've really enjoyed, and some that I have adored and think are absolute perfection. And The Trumpet Major fell in that I really enjoyed section. So this is a story about a young woman named Anne, and she has kind of like 3 different people who are interested in her, so it's very much a love square kind of a story, but it is also historical fiction and is the only historical fiction that Hardy wrote, and it took place during the Napoleonic Wars. So there's a layer of history in there too that it makes it really interesting and a lot richer than just the drama and the story. Plus, I just love Hardy's pastoral writing. I was a little bit discontent with the ending of this story, but not so much that it caused me to dislike the book as a whole. I would certainly reread this book and actually really enjoyed it. Next up is a Wilkie Collins, and that's Poor Miss Finch, which I read with my friend Dia, and my goodness, I really enjoyed this one. This is actually probably my favorite book that I read for Victober this year, either that or The Trumpet Major. And this wasn't a perfect book either, honestly, and it was very different than what I thought it was going to be going in. If you've heard of Wilkie Collins before, you know that he is known for his sensational novels, and I don't think that Poor Miss Finch is all that sensational. In fact, it feels a little bit more domestic, I guess, but it still just was a really wonderful time. It's about a young girl named Miss Finch, Lucilla, and she is blind, and the story is told from the perspective of this woman named Madame Prodolongo, who comes to be a companion and music instructor for Miss Finch. Miss Finch ends up falling in love with someone, and there's some drama that ensues there. I don't want to get too much into it or reveal too much of the plot, but while there were elements of this that were certainly like dramatic, again, I didn't feel like it was super suspenseful or sensational. It ended up kind of being a little bit more of a melodramatic love triangle at its core, but it's really funny. And so that made it feel not very melodramatic for me. The fact that we have some really humorous side characters that are in this. And then also our narrator also has like a very strong voice and is very funny herself. So it ended up being just a super enjoyable reading experience for me. But when I recommend it to people, I'm definitely going to be saying it's not as sensational as his other books because I think that differing expectations could make it so people don't enjoy it as much. I also read The Belton Estate by Anthony Trollope. This is my 3rd Trollope, and I have a bit of an iffy relationship with Trollope in that I feel like I should love him, but I just never feel invested in the characters, and the books almost always feel too long for me. So this is the first of his standalones that I've read. The other 2 books that I've read were in the Barsetshire Chronicles series that he's written. And The Belton Estate I liked better than one of his other books that I read, but it still was just kind of middle of the road for me. I didn't feel like it had the same pacing issues that I had with Barchester Towers or The Warden, but I still just like wasn't as invested in the story or the characters. And I feel like as such a prolific Victorian writer, I should really enjoy him. But his books end up feeling very forgettable for me, and The Belton Estate was no different, unfortunately. The last Victorian novel that I completed, I had one that was kind of like a soft DNF that you would have seen in my vlog, so I'm not going to talk about that because hopefully I'll still finish it by the end of the year. But anyways, the last one that I completed was 3 Men on the Bummel, and I read this with Rainy, and with Dia, and we read Three Men in a Boat together last year, and I really enjoyed that one. Wasn't perfect for me. It was like a solid 4 stars though, and I laughed out loud quite a few times while reading that book. So in Three Men in a Boat, they're going on an adventure in a boat to just get away from everything, and talks about their anecdotes, and then kind of flashes back to like, you know, this situation reminds me of a time when, and so there's anecdotes in the past and in the present that are happening. And Three Men on the Bummel is the same kind of structured narrative, but the difference is that this time when they want to get away, they decide they're going to go on a bicycling trip through the Black Forest in Germany. And for some reason, this just did not resonate with me. I didn't find most of the stories to be very funny. I thought that some of the dialogue was very witty, and there were some really good like one-liners in there, but I didn't find most of the situations that they got themselves in to be all that funny. And I would have DNF'd this book if I wasn't reading it with Dia and Rainy, and if it wasn't so short. I listened to it entirely on audio, and I really didn't enjoy it. I was just really bored, and I felt like I should have liked it because the structure was so similar, but the stories just weren't doing it for me. Okay, so I read a couple of other classics that were not Victorian, so I'm going to talk about those really quick. The first one was A Murder is Announced by Agatha Christie. I read this with my in-person book club, and it was really a fun mystery. So this is a Miss Marple mystery, and the premise of this is that in this sleepy little town, they open their newspapers, and in the personal section, there's a little thing that says, a murder will be committed today at such and such place and such time. Some of the people are alarmed by this, but most of them are like, oh, it's that game, it's that murder game. And I hadn't actually heard of this game before, but it sounds a lot like the more current game, Mafia, where one person is the mafia and like the lights go down and the mafia goes around and has to kill someone, and then they fall down and scream, and then the lights go up, and then someone's the detective and he has to try to figure out who the mafia is. And the murder game is like the same kind of format. But as you might suppose, since this is an Agatha Christie, during the murder game, someone actually dies. And so then there's an investigation from the people, the local authorities, and then Miss Marple ends up coming in and helping like she usually does. This book was really fun for me, but interestingly enough, like I figured out the ending of this, and that is not common for me. Like I didn't figure out every part of it, but I figured out who it was, and I had their motivation about half right. But there were still some twists that I was really surprised by. So I really enjoyed this one and had a lot of fun with it. It's funny because we actually had 2 in-person book club meetings in October. So one was for the book that we read in September and one was for the book that we read in October. But because of where the meetings ended up being, I actually read both of the books in October. So Murder is Announced was our October book, and our September book was actually Cain's Jawbone. So this is really interesting. I don't even know how I could rate this book because it's so bizarre. It is also a mystery, but it's a mystery that I think only like 3 people have ever solved on their own. And it's really strange. On the front it says, if James Joyce and Agatha Christie had a literary love child, this would be it. And I feel like that is a really good representation because we've definitely got kind of like some stream of consciousness thinking, and we find out that there are 6 murders that take place during this book, and there are 6 murderers, and there are multiple narratives, but every single narrative is in first person and the pages are not in order. So you have to try to group the narratives together and then put the pages in order and then figure out the order that the narratives are supposed to go in to get the whole story. We thought we could maybe be smart enough to figure this out, even though only 3 people ever have, because we had a group of us who all read this and we all came together with our notes and thought that we could figure it out. We did not. Spoiler alert. We did end up figuring a few things out, but by the time we came together, like we had figured out who one of the narrators were and got like those pages grouped together, and we gotten a few other pages grouped together as well, but like we had no idea what we were doing. So we used some online hints to help us just a little bit and point us in the right direction. But after we discussed A Murder is Announced, we went back to Cain's Jawbone that same night and worked on it some more, and we're still not done. I actually am the carrier of the pages, and we have them grouped according to their narratives, and we have a couple of them that are actually entirely complete, that we have in the right order, but I think we have like 3 narratives and there's still quite a few more that we have to organize. So I don't know how I would possibly really rate this book, but it's like, it's so interesting. There's a lot of literary references. It's so convoluted. I don't know how anyone figures it out, but we found out that like people who have come close to solving it or have shared their findings online or whatever, which is how we got hints, that they took months and months and months and worked on this. And yeah, it's taking us quite a while, even with hints. And the last classic that I completed in the month of October, well, I didn't complete it, so that's kind of a lie. October Country by Ray Bradbury. So this is a short story collection of some more spooky kind of tales from Ray Bradbury, and I did not finish this, as you can see. I read, actually, I'm a little farther than this. I had my bookmark here, but I enjoyed what I read for the most part, but I didn't read all of the short stories, and I'm okay with that. Whitney bought this for me for my birthday, and we were gonna read them together, and we did read some of them together. Whitney ended up completing this entire collection, and I did not because I had so many other books going on, but I'm totally okay with that because there's so many short stories in here, so it's just really easy to dip in and out, and I am going to save this for next October and dip in and out some more. I only completed 1 fantasy in the month of October, and actually technically I finished this on November 1st, but I'm putting it here anyway, and that's The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. The reason I'm putting this here is because I'll be reading The Lost Metal in November, so I'm just gonna talk about The Bands of Mourning while it's fresh in my head, and then I'll be able to talk about The Lost Metal when I wrap up November. So The Bands of Mourning. This is book 3 and era 2 of Mistborn, and I can't say a ton about it, honestly, just because that would be really spoilery, but we're continuing to follow Wax and Wayne as they're exploring some things that happened in book 2. We're learning more about the lore and the magic system, and all the magic is built around metals, in case you have not read this series before. And it's really interesting the way that Sanderson builds worlds and magic systems and all of that kind of stuff. And in this one, there's really definitely an exploration also of like, where is God and suffering and all of those kinds of things as well. Why do bad things happen to good people? So there's some deeper topics being explored here, in addition to him always exploring kind of some more political aspects as well, which is really, really interesting. However, this is my least favorite Mistborn book so far, mostly because I found it very, very predictable. Like a lot of the twists that happen in the end during the Sanderlanche, I saw coming miles away. And that doesn't usually happen to me with Sanderson, or just at all. I am not good at predicting things. So, which is why it's interesting that I actually was able to accurately call an Agatha Christie book and a Sanderson book in 1 month. Like maybe Kane's Jawbone prepped my brain to think a little bit deeper about mysteries, and that's why. But I think I said with Shadows of Self that I struggled with that one a little bit. I thought like the reveals and like the lore in that one were better than this one, but the narratives felt a little choppy to me. I did feel like the narratives felt less choppy in this book. Like the transitions felt smoother, but I just didn't enjoy the plot quite as much. However, I'm really looking forward to The Lost Metal and wrapping up Mistborn Era 2. I've had some people tell me that The Lost Metal is their favorite in the series that they have read, and so I'm really excited, especially because I know that there's some Stormlight crossover that happens there, and I am up to date on the Stormlight archives, so I will have my eyes peeled and ready. I completed 1 nonfiction this month, and you probably already know what it is because I hosted a read along on my channel of Honest Faith by Charles Spurgeon with Dia and Chrissy, and we had weekly live shows to discuss the sections as we had it divvied up. And it was wonderful. I absolutely loved the conversation. I think this is my least favorite Spurgeon that I've read so far. I still thought it was really uplifting, really beautifully written, very insightful, but I just didn't have the same like emotional and personal connection to it that I've had with some of his previous books that I've read. But I will say that the conversations like elevated this book that much more. It was so wonderful to hear from you guys what was really impacting you and touching you deeply. The way that this book is structured is just a little bit strange in that it's not like full chapters. There's just like little thoughts that are around a page long. And sometimes that made it feel a little bit choppy because the thoughts that he had were actually longer. A lot of the thoughts were like interconnected. So like there's a whole section where he talks about the validity of the Bible. There's times where he talks about faith versus science and all of that kind of stuff. And there's times where he talks about faith in the person of Jesus Christ and just faith versus doubt, what doubt does versus what faith does. And so I think that the book as a whole would have felt like more cohesive if those thoughts had been put into chapters, so it was like more clearly outlined where one thought began and another one ended. But I found the farther that I got into the book, the more I could easily like sense those patterns, but I thought that they were going to be like much more separate thoughts than they ended up being. So in the beginning, it just felt a little bit choppy and disorienting, but that worked itself out as I went through the book. It was a great experience, and I'm so glad I got to read it with all of you, and I'm sure that we will do it again next year at some point because Spurgeon in the fall is just wonderful. I read one middle grade this month, and it was a spooky middle grade, Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. And I really like Catherine Arden's writing. In fact, when I started Small Spaces, I was like, wow, this writing is really, really good. And I was like, oh man, Catherine Arden's name sounds familiar. Like, where do I know that from? And then I realized that she wrote, I can't remember the name of the series, but the first book is The Bear and the Nightingale. And I loved The Bear and the Nightingale. I didn't love the rest of the trilogy, but I loved The Bear and the Nightingale because it was like really slow burn, really atmospheric, such a strong sense of place and strong like uneasiness. And that also translated really well into middle grade for this Small Spaces book. It's the first in a quartet. I don't know if I'm going to go on and read the rest of them or not. I'm just not sure. But this one was great to read in fall. It actually takes place, I think, in October, but definitely in fall in New England. And so you have all the fall vibes, and it's about a young girl who ends up getting her hands on this book that seems like a spooky book, but then she sees correlations to it in real life. And so it deals so well also with like dealing with grief and loss and also friendship. And so there's so much more to this book than just like spooky vibes. And I felt like it was all really well done, but I will say I thought it was spookier when we had no idea what was going on. And then once we started to get some ideas, the things that were included, I personally didn't find all that spooky. So it ended up being not very scary for me, which is fine because I don't really want to be like terrified by a book, even a middle grade. Lastly, I'm going to talk about a translated book that I read. This was translated from Japanese, and that is The Restaurant of Lost Recipes. This is book 2 in the Kamigawa Food Detective series. I read book 1 this summer and loved it. And I really loved this one too. So this is about a restaurant that is run by a former detective. But what he's doing now is he has people who come to him with a dish that they have eaten sometime in their past, whether it was like they just don't remember the details around it or the restaurant that they were at, or maybe it was something someone cooked for them when they were a child and now that person has passed away and the recipe is gone. And so they come to this detective wanting to experience this dish again, and he finds out what goes into it, and we find out why this recipe means so much to this person. It's just a good time. Like, it's just so cozy and so foodie, and I love Japanese food. So that's why I really love this series, I think, because if you go into it thinking, oh, this is a cute cozy mystery series, you're going to be disappointed because we don't see any detecting happening at all. We get the initial interview with the person telling them what they want, and then we skip 2 weeks forward in time where they come back to try the dish that he's made. And so we don't see any of his process at all. So if you're expecting a mystery, you might be disappointed, but if you're expecting coziness and the emotions that we associate with food and memories, and if you like Japanese food, you will probably really love this series as well. I highly recommend it on audio. I've read both books on audio so far. The narrator is amazing. It's actually a really popular series in Japan, but it's just now being translated into English. So far only the 2 books are out translated into English so far. but I can't wait for more of them because I just love them. Those are the books that I completed in the month of October. So I also got part of the way through Kristen Lavrenstatter, which is split up into 3 books. So I will say that I'm really enjoying Kristen Lavrenstatter so far. And the first book in like the book that I have was amazing. I'm like fully 5 stars. And it's the first time I felt so strongly like, oh my gosh, I love this book so much in a really long time. So I'm hoping that the rest of the book ends up lining up with that as well. But because it's not complete yet, I didn't want to share a review because I haven't finished it yet. But out of the books that I finished, I didn't have any 5 stars. And that is a theme. I haven't really had any 5 stars in a while. So I'm really hoping that I have some in November. I still feel like I had a really good reading month because I had a lot of 4 stars and a lot of books that I like thoroughly enjoyed, and only a couple of books that I didn't enjoy as much. So overall, I would say it was still a pretty successful reading month, but I really hope I get some new all-time favorites soon. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. How was your reading month in October? What kind of books did you read? Did you participate in any fun events? But I would especially love to hear what was your favorite book that you read in October. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.